On the first day, man was granted a soul, and with it, clarity. On the second day, upon the earth was planted an irrevocable poison, a soul-devouring demon. These are the first words you will see in the intro cinematic upon booting up Demon Souls. These few, very simple, very powerful words serve as the prerequisites to our story, the story that is Demon Souls. Now, upon booting up Demon Souls, one of the first things you'll be prompted to do is to create your character. Now, each character has their own backstory and origins, but we're going to start with the Royalty class, a class favorite among many Souls players. Royalty. From a distinguished royal family, Yurt of Latria, this class is clad in the garb of a magician and can cast magic, but is also well trained in the art of fencing. Next up, you have the Knight. A knight of the royal family of the southern kingdom, Latria. The use of the common longsword and the yellow dragon on the class's shield signifies a low rank. Next up, you have the priest, a holy warrior who believes in the power of God and fights on behalf of the church. This class wields a mace, which is adept for smashing through enemy shields. It is said that many priests were killed while accompanying Saint Astrea in her pilgrimage to the Valley of Defilement. Next up, you have the Thief class. The thieves are defined by being shady characters hired by royalty to commit spies or assassinations. The black leather they wear helps them blend in at night and protects the user from poison strikes from rival thieves. Next up, you have the Magician class. The Magician is defined as being a commoner who has learned magic. While the class is clad in the garb of a magician, the cheap sword and shield and wooden catalyst reveal a low social status. Next up, you have the Temple Knight class. Temple Knights are a different class of holy warrior. They are charged with defending the temples of the church, and they wield weapons designed to take on many enemies at once. Many Temple Knights were killed while accompanying Saint Astrea in her pilgrimage to the Valley of Defilement, and many more were later slain in their pursuit to get to the Valley of Defilement to see what became of Maiden Astrea. Next up, you have the Soldier class. A common foot soldier from the northern kingdoms of Boletaria. This class wears thick armor and is highly skilled with a sword and a spear. Next up, you have the Wanderer class. The Wanderer is defined by being a soldier that does not serve a single master but wanders from land to land for temporary work fighting in armies. The garb of the Wanderer indicates that the class may have once been a priest, perhaps fighting in a distant country, as the weapon wielded is not of Boletarian design. A Wanderer believes in luck and chance. Next up, you have the Barbarian class. Barbarians are defined by being incredibly tough and strong members of a primitive civilization who arm themselves with rudimentary wooden weaponry. Barbarians forego armor for maximum mobility in battle, and it is said that early ancestors of the barbarians worshipped at the Shrine of Storms long ago, but the shrine has long since been abandoned for ages. Next up, you have the Hunter class. Hunters are defined by being warriors of the woods. This class is clad in soft leather armor, ideal for traveling light while creeping through fields and blending in with the forest. The primary weapon this class carries is a longbow, which is used to snipe enemies from afar, but the hunter is also equipped with an axe for close range combat are chopping down wood. So upon choosing your character, you will awaken in the Nexus at the behest of the Maiden in Black. The Maiden in Black has presumably plucked your soul from whatever demon has killed you before your soul could be claimed. The Maiden in Black is a very special character. There's no official name for her, but she is one of the first characters you meet in Demon Souls. Once you defeat your first boss and claim your first Demon Soul, the Maiden in Black will act as a conduit, as when you're ready to level up, you will bring her all the souls you have collected and you will touch the demon inside her and she will proceed to make you stronger. The Maiden in Black acts as the firekeeper of the Nexus, as she's been charged with carrying around this pole and keeping all the candles illuminated around the Nexus. One of the first things you'll notice about the Maiden in Black is that her feet are extremely dirty. Her feet are dirty because she has been blinded and her eyes have been covered with wax. As a result of that, she has to use her feet in order to feel her way around the environment so she can keep all the candles lit. The Maiden in Black is essentially your firekeeper, but she's so much more than that. It is said that the Maiden in Black was once one of the oldest and most powerful demons in existence before she was bound to the Nexus by the Monumentals. She has the power to channel demon souls the players collect in order to make the player more powerful. The Maiden in Black once had the ability to suck out the soul of any living creature, instantly killing them, but she no longer can, likely due to the wax covering her eyes. But after the Maiden in Black awakens you, before you can use her power to channel souls, you must first make your way through Boletaria and get your first demon soul in order to gain an audience with the Monumental. Now, as you arrive in Boletaria, the layout is actually quite brilliant. If you like how interconnected everything was in Dark Souls, all roads leading back to Firelink Shrine, then Demon Souls kinda does something similar with its level of design. Contrary to Dark Souls, where you can find bonfires just about everywhere assuming you know where to look, Demon Souls is a bit different. Once you spawn into a region, you spawn at your first Arkstone. This Arkstone serves as your bonfire until you reach the next Arkstone. Each world usually has only about 3 to 4 Arkstones in them. As you make your way through Boletaria, you'll encounter all manner of foes that seem to want to impede your progress. You'll face many standard foot soldiers, as well as many dredgelings, as well as many black knights, those being the most fearsome of the bunch. And as you're starting the game out, especially if you're on New Game Plus, almost anything can 2 to 3 tap you, especially if you're going up against black knights. So as you're making your way to the first boss to collect your first demon soul, you'll fight no shortage of black knights. So naturally, I assumed, seeing as the black knights are one of the most fearsome enemies on your way to the boss is likely going to be a black knight or some kind of badass variation of a black knight, right? I was absolutely stunned the first time I made it to this boss and I saw this big silver tier looking ass. This big blob is the Phalanx, and the shield bearers surrounding the Phalanx are its hoplites. Now, you can't actually talk about the Phalanx without talking about Longbow Allant, as Longbow Allant literally is the Phalanx. Allant was once a warrior that fought in the War of Demons. Little was actually known about her, but during the spread of corruption, when Allant fell, she was corrupted. The fog turned her into the Phalanx as the fog sees her inner traits of being a coward as the fog sees her hiding behind others. Now, the way the fog works when you are corrupted is the fog looks inside you and it looks for your worst inner traits. And based off your worst inner traits, it will turn you into that manifestation of a demon. The fog saw Longbow Allant as being a coward as she hides behind others, seeing as she uses a longbow, and the fog turned her into the Phalanx as a result of that. The Phalanx can't fight for itself, as you'll notice when you are fighting the Phalanx. The Phalanx can only be defended by its hoplites. But others speculate that the only reason this happened is simply because she was a bowwoman. Because she was a bowwoman, she would naturally keep her distance and fight from afar while protecting her own life. Her weapon is a bow, not necessarily suited for close-range combat, so as it is in her nature to fight from afar, apparently the fog saw this as cowardice, and thus, when she was corrupted, she was turned into the Phalanx. Now, like I said earlier, the Phalanx doesn't actually deal any damage to you. The damage comes from all the hoplites surrounding the Phalanx that are throwing a barrage of spears at you. This could easily be one of the easiest fights in the game, or it could be one of the hardest fights, seeing as at this point you would be a new player, and if you don't know what to do, you would likely run around just trying to hit the Phalanx with all your attacks being deflected by hoplite shields. The key to this fight, as is the same with a lot of fights in the Souls genre, is simply to be patient and to use the items the game has given you. By this point in the game, you've likely accumulated several fire bombs. These fire bombs can dispatch several hoplites with one throw, so make sure you're using them. If you go through your inventory, you'll also likely notice that you have pine resin. Once again, the Phalanx is weak to fire, so once you've dispatched enough hoplites, you can easily dispatch the Phalanx as long as you're using the items the game is giving to you. After defeating the Phalanx, you are free to claim your first demon soul. And after defeating the Phalanx and claiming the demon soul, you have earned an audience with the Monumental. At the top floor of the Nexus, you will encounter a floor full of dead Monumentals with one remaining. The Monumental talks to you about a distant time that has long since passed, and this is her tale.
In the distant past, under benevolent rule, the world was united owing to the soul arts. Until a lust for power caused the awakening of the Old One. Across the land seeped a colorless, deep fog, and the world faced extinction at the hands of the demons. Thanks be, we were able to lull the Old One back to its slumber, yet only after the loss of innumerable souls, and most of the world lost, erased by the fog. In order to mend the fabric of what lands still remained, we entrusted 6 leaders with 6 precious archstones, one to the king of a small yet industrious land, one to the king of the burrowers underground, one to the wise queen of the great ivory tower, one to the chieftain of lost and ill-fortuned souls, one to the shaman of the tempest-worshipping shadowmen, and and the last to the great giants of the northern lands. The archstones were placed in the fringelands that survived. We contained the Old One here below the Nexus and prohibited the soul arts. Finally, we became monumentals, half-living sentinels of the fabric of reality. Alas, the other monumentals have perished, and only I remain. Now it is your turn.
In a distant past, the ones who sought greater power awakened the Old One, and a demonic colorless fog swept across the land. Heroes arose to fight the demon scourge, but by the time the Old One had been put back to sleep, half of the world's population had been destroyed by the fog. To unite what remained of the world, 6 archstones were given to the rulers of the remaining lands, which allowed for quick travel to the Nexus. To prevent the future rise of the Old One was imprisoned below the Nexus, and the soul arts, the power that is derived from the souls of others, were banned. Those heroes that survived the quest became monumentals, half-living, being tasked with preserving the fabric of reality. As time passed, the archstones were forgotten by humanity, and the monumentals slowly began to perish. Now only one monumental remains to aid the player in correcting King Allant's mistake in awakening the Old One. The monumental claims that only by destroying all the demons will the player be freed from their nexial bindings. The monumental encourages the player to allow the Maiden in Black to lull the Old One back to sleep, and this is essentially the light side ending of the game. And although there are those that believe King Allant did awaken the Old One, there are also those who speculate that the monumentals themselves awoken the Old One. They then enslaved passing souls with nexial bindings in a desperate bid to undo their mistake. Regardless of how it happened, you know what must be done. So if you accept the Monumental's mission, the Monumental clears a path for you to explore the outer reaches of the fog. And at this point, you're pretty much free to tackle whatever world and whatever order you want. So considering the fact that you are now free to tackle whatever world you want in whatever order you want, I make my way back to Boletaria, killing through all the enemies along the way from where I killed the Phalanx. At this point, as you're making your way along the castle wall, you'll encounter a fire-breathing dragon. The dragon is easy enough as long as you can make it through the first initial barrage of fire. Once you make it through the first initial barrage, you'll reach an outcropping where the archers are trying to snipe you down. This little outcropping is out of reach of the dragon's fire. Now, assuming you have a bow that's at least +5 to +6 to +7, you can pretty easily blitz the dragon down, assuming you have the arrows in your inventory. The dragon fight is pretty much just a battle of attrition because this guy doesn't take a lot of damage and you can only get one shot per go around off him. And so, considering all those factors, it really becomes a battle of attrition and it takes quite a while to blitz the dragon down. But once you blitz the dragon down, you can claim the red dragon soul. Now, unlike other demon souls in the game, which gives you the ability to craft certain weapons or purchase certain miracles or spells, the red dragon soul isn't used for anything, so feel free to consume the red dragon soul for a nice chunky 10k souls. Now that you've killed the red dragon, you can pretty much proceed at your own leisure and make your way past all the enemies attempting to impede your progress. But after you make your way past all the enemies along the castle wall, you'll run into the true knight of Boletaria, the Tower Knight, aka Alfred. Now the Tower Knight is a 30-foot tall knight clad head to toe in armor. It wields a large tower shield, a lance, and it is assisted by a group of archers that are attempting to snipe you from the higher walls of the arena you're fighting this thing in. Now, there is actually a trophy tied to this boss. If you kill the boss without killing any of the archers, you will receive a trophy. It's actually a hidden trophy, but that is much easier said than done because these archers will pick you apart before the Tower Knight will. And if you're on New Game Plus, it only takes one hit for the Tower Knight to kill you. The Tower Knight can easily one-tap you. So ideally what you want to do is you want to have the Thief's Ring. With the Thief's Ring, you can fight this guy in the corner of the arena, and for the most part, the archers will pretty much just ignore you as long as you have this guy in the corner. It's a pretty difficult fight, and it's even more difficult if you're on New Game Plus, but if you do this the first time around, you won't have to worry about this on New Game Plus. Little is known about the Tower Knight, but what we do know about the Tower Knight is that the Tower Knight is the corrupted form of Alfred. Now, who is Alfred? Alfred was a Knight of the Tower, a Knight of the Round Table in Boletaria. Before the Scourge, he wielded the largest and heaviest shield of all in Boletaria. Able to stop almost any physical or magical blow, he now wields a much larger version of his signature tower shield. Alfred appears in later levels as a black phantom wearing brushwood armor and wielding the scraping spear as well as the tower shield. Unfortunately, the Tower Knight is an absolute menace on New Game Plus, but upon defeating him, you're free to claim the Iron Demon Soul. Now that you have attained the Iron Demon Soul, you're free to consume that Demon Soul or hold on to it. Now, most players will always tell you to hold on to these boss Demon Souls because they'll serve a much greater purpose later down the line, and plus accruing souls isn't necessarily that hard. So I make my way back to the Nexus and I spend the souls that I have accrued during my time in Boletaria. And after leveling up with the Maiden in Black, I make my way to the highest point of the Nexus and I jump off. That way I can suicide. Now, why do we suicide? Well, suiciding allows us to proceed in soul form. We won't have as much health, but it won't affect our world tendency if we die. Now, Demon Souls has a very interesting mechanic called World Tendency and Character Tendency. Now, World Tendency and Character Tendency is basically the state your world or character is in at the time. Now, you can basically have a white side world tendency or a black side world tendency or a neutral side world tendency. The same goes for your character tendency. Achieving white world tendency can be done by simply playing the game as you normally would and killing bosses along the way, while a black world tendency can be achieved by dying in a certain world in body form. That's why you always suicide at the Nexus so you can proceed in soul form, as if you die in soul form, it will not affect your world tendency. Now, white world tendency is good because it can give you access to white world tendency events. These events will unlock a certain path that may not have previously been accessible when your area was neutral or in a black world state. And by accessing these areas and doing these events, it will usually give you access to a special item that will allow you to free someone later, or it will give you access to a special weapon, such as the Magic Makoto sword, but that's just one example. Now you're probably wondering, why the hell would you ever want to have Black World tendency? Well, Black World tendency can directly affect your character tendency. Now your character tendency is either negatively affected by you killing random NPCs, or it can be affected in a positive way by you killing black phantoms in a Black World state. Every world is going to have a Black Phantom, but they will also have one signature named Black Phantom that is particularly tough. And if you make your way through those areas and you kill that Black Phantom, it will not only raise your world tendency, but it will raise your character tendency. And killing all these Black Phantoms in the game should raise your character tendency all the way to white character tendency, which will give you access to the friendship ring from the Monumental at the end of the game. There are also these prime evil demons that only spawn on a Black World state. So that is another reason you will push your world to a Black World state, because certain weapons require a colorless demon soul to level up. These colorless demon souls can only be obtained from the prime evil demon, and these prime evil demons only spawn on Black World states. So in order to get to a Black World state, you will have to have at least 7 stones of ephemeral eyes. That way you can restore your body form, and you can suicide 7 times in a particular area. And by the time you teleport, you will be at a Black World state. And if you manage to kill the named Black Phantom and make your way all the way to the prime evil demon without teleporting, you'll not only push your world back up to neutral, but you'll push your world almost back to a white world state. So we make our way over to World 2 and we start proceeding through the mines of Stonefang Tunnel. Now this area is a prime example of it's only as hard as you make it, as considering the fact that you're fighting miners, their skin is naturally fortified and they have a natural resistance to slash damage, and most players at this point are going to be using a slash based weapon. But assuming you have a puncture based weapon like a rapier or a spear, you can pretty much sail through this area as long as you're careful. As you're making your way through this area, you'll encounter several of these fat officials. It's very important that you kill these officials because each official will drop an article of clothing. Eventually, you'll have almost a full set of the officials' gear. You'll need a full set of the officials' gear to rescue a certain NPC in World 1 later on. So by making our way through this area and activating this lift, we not only have a shortcut that's going to help us get to the boss in no time, but we now have access to this gentleman right here who will be crafting all of our boss weapons, assuming you offer him a certain demon soul, but we're not necessarily there yet. So as you continue to descend through the mines, you'll encounter the first boss of World 2-1, the Armored Spider. Now the Armored Spider is another one of those bosses that I would consider underwhelming, as you're basically stuck in a tunnel with this dude with nowhere to go, and this dude's just shooting a barrage of fireball attacks at you, as well as shooting fucking spider webs at you and spewing lava on the floor. So this fight can be a real pain in the ass, especially on New Game Plus. Now, little is actually known about the Armored Spider, as the flavor text on its soul doesn't give any clues to its origins, which leads to a lot of speculation. Now, one theory about the Armored Spider is that the Armored Spider is some kind of demon sentinel created by the Fat Ministers to guard the entrance to Tunnel City. The fireball and the flamethrower that the spider uses are amped up versions of the same spells that the Fat Ministers uses. Another theory is that the spider is actually created by whatever higher being created the Fat Ministers. And another theory states that the spider may have been accidentally created as a consequence for messing around near the Crisp Blade, which is a ceremonial dagger used for incantations. But upon defeating the armored spider, you can now claim the hard demon soul. After spending all my souls at the Nexus, I suicide and I make my way over to World 4-1 in order to unlock one of the best farming locations in the game. As you're making your way through the Shrine of Storms, one of the first mini bosses you will encounter is the Grey Demon. Now this guy is literally the poster boy for demon souls. If you have ever seen a screenshot taken for the sake of a thumbnail, there is a 90% chance that this dude was in it. So considering that fact, I go ahead and I line up the screenshot before I face down the Grey Demon. I make my way through the pits below and I rescue the merchant and I come out the other side of the Grey Demon. And luckily my magic damage is pretty good at this point and I can pretty much melt this guy even though this is New Game Plus. So as you descend through the Shrine of Storms, one of the first major bosses you will encounter is the Adjudicator. Now the Adjudicator is another one of those bosses people are indifferent on, as this dude is an absolute beast on New Game Plus and he can easily one-tap you if you aren't careful. But unfortunately this boss is another boss that has an achievement tied to him. The achievement wants you to kill him without having him fall down once. So unfortunately, you're going to be sitting back trying to snipe this dude with a bow and arrow from the safety of the ledge above. But upon doing that, you will obtain the achievement. And this isn't so much of a problem in New Game Plus as long as you get the achievement the first time around. In New Game Plus, you can pretty much fight this dude like you would fight a normal boss. But the only thing is, this dude can absolutely one-tap you, so you have to really be on your toes. So what we do know about the Adjudicator is, the Adjudicator is a large, morbidly obese humanoid with a large tongue, a golden crow on top of its head, and it's wielding 2 large knives. Now long ago, the Shadow Men, a tribe of very tall pagans and barbarians, built the Shrine of Storms on the island to worship storms and death. Though the shrines still remain, all the members of the tribe either die out or abandoned the shrine ages ago. It was the Shadow Men's beliefs that by appeasing the Storm Beast and their master, the mythical Storm King, through a ghastly ritual, they would bring forth rain. The Shadow Men who died would be first to be brought before the Adjudicator to determine if they would go on to the next phase of the ritual. The Adjudicator is a large blubberous creature in which in his right hand he wields a large cleaver, in his other hand is a broken cleaver. For reasons that aren't disclosed, the cleaver in its left hand is broken off into its own belly. If not for that cleaver in his belly, his body would be completely impervious to damage, as when you attack him, you'll see that all your attacks literally just bounce off this dude. The Adjudicator is the embodiment of insatiable greed, and the funny thing about the Adjudicator is the Adjudicator's body isn't actually the demon. The demon is the crow on its head that controls the body. So basically what you have to do is you have to avoid this guy's attack, and you have to deal enough damage to the cleaver that's embedded in his belly, and eventually he'll fall down, giving you a small damage window so you can damage the crow. Upon defeating the Adjudicator, you're free to claim the swollen demon soul. And after you go back to the Nexus, spend your souls to level up, and you suicide to restore your soul form, you're free to come back to this area, as since you have defeated the Adjudicator and claimed the swollen demon soul, you have now unlocked one of the best farming locations in the game. This area is special because this area can easily net you from 7,000 to 17,000 souls per run, depending on if you have the right spells and equipment to amplify your soul gain. This area is accessible for the rest of the game, and you'll be coming back here a lot. One thing that's worth noting is that if you drop down this hole right here, you'll encounter Saint Urbane just standing here, right across from a black phantom. Also, if you have white world tendency, which you probably don't at this point, you'll be able to retrieve the item from this little mound right here, which happens to be the Magic Makoto sword. If you do have the Magic Makoto sword, some guy comes into this world to retrieve it, and if you refuse to give it to him, the guy attacks you, causing you to kill him, and that does affect your character tendency, I believe. But if you come back to the world in a black world tier state, then his black phantom will be there to kill, and that will boost your character tendency right back up. But for the time being, you have to dispatch this black phantom down here, and once you do that, you can make contact with Saint Urbane. Saint Urbane is basically our miracle vendor, and he will appear back at the Nexus once you talk to him. At this point, I make my way back to the Nexus, and I level up using all of the souls that I have accrued using the soul form, and I make my way back to World 2 at this point. At this point, we want to do the next section, and to get to the next boss, there are basically two ways you can go. One way will have you descend through this series of sketchy jumps where you'll eventually encounter Patches. Patches will ask you to do some sketchy shit, but upon completing the task that he has assigned to you, he will appear at the Shrine of Storms where we just unlocked the soul form. And if you talk to him over there, he'll actually kick you down the hole where we fought that Black Phantom and we rescued Saint Urbane. But we kind of bypassed that at this point, but he'll still appear at that location. So you have to make sure you go back to that location to unlock him as a vendor at the Nexus. Now the other way just takes you down a tunnel and has you descend through one series full of sketchy drops. And one thing that's worth noting is there's an NPC over here as you're descending. He will ask if you have ever heard of the Dragon Bone Smasher. At this point, you probably don't have the Dragon Bone Smasher unless you're New Game Plus, but after defeating the Archdemon at this location, you will be able to obtain the Dragon Bone Smasher and come back to this location. One thing that's worth noting is this dude actually has a Black Phantom that will appear in a Black World state, and his Black Phantom is one of the toughest enemies in the fucking game. And it is awfully ironic that this guy's Black Phantom happens to be next to one of the hardest bosses in the game. Enter the Flamelurker. Now, the Flamelurker isn't that bad on normal mode if you have all the necessary items and spells to negate the flame buildup he does. But on New Game Plus, this dude is an absolute menace. The Flamelurker has moves that will 2-tap you, and he also has moves that do a wide AoE range that will CC you, and it's just a really bad time fighting this dude. You really need a purple flame shield that has been upgraded to like +6 or 7 to be taking this dude on, because this guy is an absolute monster and he'll run you out the building if you're not careful. Now, what do we know about the Flamelurker? Well, the Flamelurker is described as being a 10-foot tall horned creature covered in spikes and engulfed in flames. Its fists create a huge explosion of fire. The Archstone speaks of a fire demon that has been trapped in the temple of the dragon god since ancient times. The Flamelurker is undoubtedly related to the fire demon. Little can be extrapolated about the Flamelurker's origin since the boss soul is given to Ed in order to craft boss weapons, and there aren't any necessary spells that require the Flamelurker's demon soul. There's a theory that the placement of 2 hands of God in the Flamelurker's chambers, which speaks of the legendary Big M, hints that the Flamelurker is his fire demon possessed spirit. Now, Big M was a strong man from long ago who used godlike fists to slaughter demons with his bare hands. Flamelurkers attacks exclusively with magma-infused fists. Both Baldwin and Ed each carry a hand of God and are known for their feats of strength, which hints that they are descendants of Big M. As trades are often passed down by the family line, it is likely that Big M was also a blacksmith, and thus it would be fitting that Big M's demon soul would be used in blacksmithing. After defeating the Flamelurker, you will acquire the Searing Demon Soul. If you offer the Searing Demon Soul to Ed the blacksmith, you will gain the ability to craft boss weapons. So after that, I head back to the Nexus and I suicide. That way I can proceed in soul form, but not before spending my souls, of course. Now that we have taken care of the Flamelurker, we're ready to take on the next archdemon, the Dragon God, aka the Sultan of Chaos. Now, this archdemon fight is a little gimmicky, as all of the archdemon fights are somewhat gimmicky. One of the first things you're going to notice when you enter this arena is there's a path to your left with a weapon that seems to be encased in stone or something. Unfortunately, this path is blocked off for now. I believe you need White World Tendency to get through, but you will have that in a minute. Now, as far as the Dragon God fight, this fight is pretty simple, as you only have like 2 or 3 steps to execute, but executing those steps is much easier said than done. What you basically need to do is you need to make your way along the pathway, clearing out the debris as you go so you can get through. And you need to hide behind these pillars so the Dragon God doesn't see you, as if he sees you, he'll just punch the wall and it'll be an instant one-shot and you have to start over. But once you make your way along the path, you'll eventually reach an opening where there'll be a giant ballista. You can use this ballista to shoot him, and the arrow will puncture him and it will immobilize him a little bit. After you shoot him with the first ballista, you need to make your way to the second ballista and shoot him with that one. Once you shoot him with the second ballista, he'll fall down and you'll be able to damage him normally. This is all much easier said than done. Now, what do we know about the Dragon God? Well, the Dragon God, aka the Sultan of Chaos, is a 100-foot tall dragon with a massive wingspan that fills the entire chamber. If he perceives the player's presence, he'll attempt to smash him with his spiked fists. Miraculously, the dragon bones at the base of the mine exuded ore imbued with the power of flame. This is what the ancient burrowers called Dragonstone. In order to appease the bones of the Dragon God, the ancient burrowers carefully crafted a temple where they could both worship and contain their Dragon God. Should it ever resurrect, as a precaution, the burrowers constructed 2 large magically enchanted harpoon guns on both sides of the molten pit. The ancient burrowers also crafted the Dragon Bone Smasher, a huge sword capable of crushing dragon bones.
The deep fog eventually reached the depths of the Stonefang mine, and when it touched the molten dragon bones, it tapped into the power inherent in the colossal flames to resurrect the dragon god as a demon. The body of a humanoid in shape, almost like a giant man who grew scales, spouted wings and a tail, and had its head transformed into a dragon's. Over the course of the game, there's actually the possibility to encounter two different dragon gods. There is one that you must face at the bottom of Stonefang, which is the one we are currently dealing with, but there is also another the player encounters if the Vanguard is defeated at the end of the journey to the Nexus. Now, this archdemon has an achievement tied to it, as once you impale him with the two ballistas and you're able to damage him normally, there is an achievement for defeating him with the hands of God. So I would advise that you go ahead and put on the hands of God and just be careful, because this guy's flame breath can still one-tap you even when he's on the ground. But upon defeating him, you're free to claim his demon soul. And now there's a couple things that you can do with his demon soul. You can either trade his demon soul to Uria for Firestorm, or you can trade his demon soul to Saint Urbane for God's Wrath. Now, if you have a mage build, I would recommend you get Firestorm from Uria, because Firestorm absolutely melts everything. And this actually ties to one of the reasons why you can do anything in any order in the game, because Uria is at the far reaches of the first world we explored. She's locked in a cell in Boletaria, but you can only access her by having a full set of officials gear, and I believe you also need to be White World Tendency. So yeah, but if you're playing the game on New Game Plus, then you're really not gonna have to worry about it, because most likely you already have Firestorm. So now that we have defeated the Archdemon in World 2, we make our way back to the Nexus and we level up with the Maiden in Black. After we level up, we suicide. That way we can proceed in soul form, and we make our way over to World 3, the Prison of Latria. Now, the Prison of Latria used to be one of my most hated areas, but on subsequent playthroughs, it's actually one of my most favorite areas to make my way through. You just have to be careful and watch out for the overabundance of mind flares on every single floor of this area. Now, what are mind flares, you may ask? Well, mind flares are described as being powerful mages which can move swiftly and cast spells that will paralyze you. They have heads of octopus and they wear fine robes and carry lanterns and bells and spices that you'll need to restore your magical power. Mind flares are some of the most intimidating enemies in the game, because I don't believe you can block their magic, and their magic will stun you for such a long time that they'll have plenty of time to run over to you, grab a hold of you, and attempt to suck out your brain. Also, as you make your way through the Prison of Latria, you'll encounter several NPCs that need to be rescued, some of which can only be rescued on White World Tendency, where you have to get an item in a later part of the level and come back and free this person. Also, one thing that's worth noting is at least one of the people you rescue, Rydell in particular, has a Black Phantom. So if you were to come back here on Black World Tendency, you would have to fight his Black Phantom, and his Black Phantom can be pretty tough. We also have an NPC in here that serves as our vendor. You can tell by her garbs that she used to be some form of royalty, but now she's been confined to this cell where she sells the players items, and she will also sell you the Ring of Avarice for 50,000 souls, which allows you to gain more souls whenever souls are gained. As you descend to the bottom of this place, you'll encounter a huge ballista that's just shooting a barrage of arrows off, and there is a way you can deviate around this, but honestly you should just roll your way through because there is actually a trophy that is obtainable as long as you get past the ballista by simply rolling. After you get past the ballista, there is a black phantom you'll need to deal with further up here before you take on the Fool's Idol. But before you even do that, you need to take a detour up to this tower because there's a key up here you need to grab, and there's also an asshole up here you need to kill. This guy seems harmless enough, but if you don't kill this guy, he'll heal the boss and he'll shout some shit at you as you kill her like, "Oh, you fool, woody woody wopty wop, woody woody wopty wop." So you really have to make sure you kill this dude because he can be a pain in the ass later. After you've done all that though, you're ready to take on the Fool's Idol. Now the Fool's Idol is another boss with an achievement tied to it. The Fool's Idol achievement basically wants you to damage only the real idol, as she can make several false idols which are clones of herself. In order to do this, what you need to do is you need to just lock on to each idol, and the idol that appears that does not have the health bar above their head is the real Fool's Idol, and that's the one you need to be damaging. As far as what we know about the Fool's Idol is a life-size animated doll created in the image of the deceased Queen of Latria. It has the power to create more powerful copies of itself, paralyze the player, and cast more powerful versions of spells like Soul Ray. The Fool's Idol is also controlled by the old monk. Its purpose is to deceive the prisoners into thinking that the queen is still alive. The belief that the queen is alive gave the prisoners hope and quieted any insurrections and lured prisoners into the church in order to worship the Fool's Idol and seek redemption from her. The act of redemption meant being taken above by the gargoyles up into the tower in the church. These prisoners would subsequently be taken to the womb below the old monk's tower, where their souls would be stolen and their flesh would be twisted in the old monk's experiments in order to create new demons. The queen was a gifted sorceress, and it is likely that much of her soul was used in the creation of the Fool's Idol, as the doll has mastery of many magics. The Fool's Idol has the capability to cast Soul Arrow, Soul Ray, and create many copies of herself in order to confuse the player and temporarily paralyze the player. The Fool's Idol is quite literally and figuratively the old monk's puppet, or more specifically, it bears the marking of a marionette without strings. A marionette is a puppet controlled by strings or wires that are attached at various points of the body. And if you look at the Fool's Idol's form when you're fighting her, she almost appears as she is a puppet. Like, just look at the way she floats in the air. It almost appears like someone is manipulating her with strings. After defeating the Fool's Idol, you will likely walk towards the altar, as there's a nice shiny piece of loot up that way. But as you approach the altar, you will be grabbed by 3 goblins and you'll be hoisted off onto the next section of the map, which is Upper Latria. But now that you are in Upper Latria, feel free to go up the stairs and claim the doll demon soul. The doll demon soul can be used to buy Soul Ray from Sage Freak, or alternatively, it can be consumed for 7,000 souls, which really isn't much. But After we make our way back to the Nexus, we level up with the Maiden in Black. After leveling up, we make sure we suicide, that way we can proceed in Soul Farm, and we head back to Upper Latria. Now, Upper Latria is a pretty cool area. You can actually zoom through this area assuming you know where you're going. Unfortunately, it's plagued by a fuck ton of gargoyles, but the gargoyles don't seem to have the best AI in the game, so they're actually pretty stupid, so you can easily take advantage of that. What you want to do in this section is you want to make your way to these 2 towers. Once you enter one of these towers, you'll ascend and you'll notice 4 prisoners. They're using some kind of magic in order to hoist these chains up. If you kill the 4 prisoners, the chains will drop and eventually the heart will drop. Once you do that to both towers, the heart will drop to the floor and it will somewhat change the layout of a certain section of the map. But regardless, you'll be free to proceed to the boss at that point. So as you're making your way through these areas in order to get to the tower, you'll likely encounter an NPC trapped inside of a cage. This NPC is Yurt. Now, Yurt claims he's on your side. He says he's here to face the demons. But the thing is, if you let Yurt out, Yurt will thank you and he'll pop up at the Nexus. And for every major demon that you kill, Yurt will kill like 2 NPCs till eventually there won't be anyone left except you and Yurt. And then Yurt will come kill you, or at least he'll try to. And so if you leave Yurt in the cage, eventually Yurt will still find a way to get out and he'll pop up at the Nexus and start wreaking havoc on the place. So I'm going to release Yurt. I'm going to go ahead and let Yurt out. And I'm just going to take Yurt out right now because Yurt is kind of a pain in the ass and I don't want to have to deal with him later. And unfortunately, killing Yurt will affect your character tendency unless you just like kind of push him off the edge. If you just push him off the edge, it shouldn't affect your character tendency. But yeah, Yurt's kind of a pain in the ass. So we're going to go ahead and just take Yurt out right now. One quick side note is, if you end up taking up Yurt's quest and going around killing the NPCs yourself, you'll eventually unlock this NPC who wants you to kill everybody at the Nexus. And once you complete her quest, she will give you the foes ring, opposite of the friendship ring. But once you kill Yurt and you deal with the second tower, the heart will completely collapse, and at this point a bunch of spider enemies will be running around, but none of that matters at this point because we're free to take on the boss. Now the boss of this area is the Gargoyle Duo. This is the original duo boss fight in Souls games. Now having said that, unfortunately, both these guys are pretty stupid. Especially if you're running a Thief's Ring. Like if you have a Thief's Ring on, you'll just kind of break the AI for these guys and they'll just totally glitch out. So unfortunately, because the AI is so stupid and prone to glitching out, you kind of want to take these guys out kind of quick because there will be some situations, especially in New Game Plus, where you basically got these guys one-shotted, but the AI manages to glitch out and some weird shit happens to where you get one-shotted or you end up falling off the edge or something. So ideally, you want to take these guys out kind of quick because the quicker you take these guys out, the less opportunities the AI has to glitch out on you. As far as what we know about the Gargoyle Duo, the duo is described as being a pair of large winged creatures covered in coarse fur, each with the tail of a serpent and the face of a man. These twin abominations are creations of the old monk, with the gray face of a man, a large muscular body, and wings capable of limited flight, as well as the tail of a serpent. there are scorch marks where the wings and the snake connect to the main body as if they were somehow fused on. The man-eaters are tasked with guarding the final hallway which leads up to the throne room of the old monk's tower. The man-eater may not refer to the main creature's hunger for human flesh, but of the serpent's tail's dark parasitic nature with the main body. Just beyond the fog gate is the only corpse in the game which possesses 2 souls. This seems to indicate that it's somehow connected to the man-eater. Upon defeating the man-eater will drop the mixed demon soul. The man-eater's mixed demon soul can be used to craft the weapon, the Needle of Eternal Agony. The weapon is a long curved barbed needle that, when hooked into the flesh of a creature, it siphons away a small piece of its soul. Now that you have taken out the twin gargoyles, you're free to return to the Nexus. So we go back to the Nexus and we have an audience with the Maiden in Black and we level up. Now that we level up and we have defeated the gargoyles, we're free to take out the archdemon, which is the old monk. Now, the old monk is probably one of the most unique of all the archdemons, as the old monk doesn't actually fight you. What the old monk does is the old monk summons a champion. Now, this champion that the old monk summons has a good chance to beat another player from another world. So if you're lucky, the old monk will summon another player in as its champion. A good way to know if they'd summon the player in is when you get to the arena. If you see some guy just sitting on the floor, or you see some guy running around destroying all the chairs, that's a player. Other than that, if it can't find a player, it spawns in an avatar, but unfortunately the avatar that it spawns in, the standard AI guy, is a pretty easy cakewalk. Like, the hardest part of beating the AI avatar is simply getting to the location to begin with, as to get to the old monk's chambers, you have to run up this long hallway, which normally isn't a problem, but there are 2 mind flayers in this hallway. Now you might think, oh yeah, no big deal. I have died more times in this hallway trying to get to the old monk than I have during the actual boss fight. So keep that in mind. Now, as far as what we know about the old monk, well, the withered body of the old monk is the possessed vessel of the golden robe. So in turn, the robe is the actual demon. The old monk was the husband of the supreme ruler of Latria, the Queen of Yadimir. He was banished from Latria for unknown crimes which were described as being depraved, possibly an affair, experimentation with humans, or something much, much worse. In his exile, he came upon the golden robe, a powerful artifact which gives powers to those who wears it, but slowly sucks the life force from the user. With the power of the golden robe, he returned to Latria with demons in tow and besieged the city, killed the queen in secret, and locked her entire family away in the dungeon. From the soul of the queen, he crafted a doppelganger, a doll for the residents of Latria to worship. Using this false idol, he convinced the prisoners to seek redemption by participating in the old monk's experiments to use the soul and flesh to create new demons. Near the beginning of the second scourge, Sage Freak attempted to stop the siege on Latria, but even he was defeated and imprisoned by the old monk. By the time the player arrives in Latria, the old monk resembles a corpse, and it is only the power of the golden garb that keeps him alive. Some speculate that the giant organ beneath the old monk's tower is a heart powered with human souls in order to keep him alive, while others believe the giant organ is instead some kind of womb where souls and flesh mingle and are fused together by the old monk in order to create his demons, as face bugs crawl out of the heart once you break the chains and the heart crashes to the ground. In the end, it is revealed that the old monk is not really a demon in the traditional sense. The golden robe, like a parasite, is the true source of power, and his body is just the host, a medium in which it's used to carry out his bidding. As soon as the robe senses someone more powerful than the old monk, as the player enters, it summons another player in the form of a black phantom, and it abandons the withering body of the old monk in hopes of defeating and possessing the player. Upon defeating the old monk, you can claim the golden demon soul. Now, the golden demon soul can be used to craft the insanity catalyst. And the insanity catalyst, it greatly increases the strength of magic attacks, but at the cost to the user's mind, as it cuts your magic power in half. Now, the insanity catalyst is wrapped in the scrap of fabric from the golden garb. This item represents the relationship between the queen and the old monk. Regardless of what you do with the golden demon soul, it's time to head back to the Nexus. After we level up with the Maiden in Black, we make sure to suicide so we can proceed in soul form. And then we make our way back to the Shrine of Storms. Now, you may recognize this area earlier, as this is the area where we unlocked our soul form. Now we are going to make our way through the area and descend through the shrine. And this area is a prime example of an area that's only as hard as you make it. As I'm sure you've realized by now, there's a bunch of these spectral alien guys roaming around. But if you kill the Reaper, all of these guys will despawn. So knowing where the Reaper is makes this area dramatically easier. There's about 3 Reapers in total, but once you make it past those guys, you'll reach the lower caves of the shrine where you'll encounter a bunch of slugs. Now, this is the best farming place for sticky white stuff, which will buff your weapon with magic damage. Regardless of that, after you make your way through this area, you'll reach the tomb of the old hero. Now, the old hero is another one of those bosses that can be either fairly decent or can be cheesed very easily. The thing about the old hero is this dude is completely blind. So if you stand still, it kind of breaks his AI. Also, if you are running a thief's ring, that pretty much makes this fight negligible as fuck. This could have been a good boss fight if you fight this guy normally, but the thing is, why the fuck would you do that? Because if you die to this guy, then you have to descend all the way back to this area in order to repeat the process. So yeah, I don't see why many players would take their thief's ring off and fight this guy normally when you can take advantage of the fact that he's blind. As far as what we know about the old hero, well, the old hero, aka the Searcher of Storms, is the soul form of a blind Shadow Man warrior who wields a weathered crystal sword. Now, we know the Shrine of Storms were used for rituals, and for the next phase of the ritual, the corpse is laid on the Shadow Man shrine during a storm and mourned by the tribe and purified by the rain. Now, overlooking the exit from the chamber is the body of the old hero, a blind warrior from long ago who, with the help of his crystal blade, survived for years by luck and with acute awareness of his surroundings. When the player enters his chamber, the soul form of the old hero breaks free from his body to challenge the player. Though he is blind, his other senses are very sensitive. Noises such as running or clattering armor will alert the old hero to the player's position, and he will pounce, slashing them to pieces with his large sword of searching. Now, speaking of the large sword of searching, upon defeating the old hero, you can claim the hero demon soul. And the hero demon soul can be used to craft the large sword of searching, or it can be used to grab second chance. Second chance is easily one of the best miracles in the entire game, as when you die, it will give you a second chance at life and restore you to half health, assuming you didn't fall off a cliff or something. Regardless of what you decide to do with the hero's demon soul, it's time to return to the Nexus and prepare for your next archdemon. Now, after I level up with the Maiden in Black, I head to the higher reaches of the Nexus and I suicide. That way I can proceed in soul form. Upon making our way back to the Shrine of Storms, we're ready to face our next archdemon, the Storm King. Now, the Storm King fight is pretty simple, and it's even more so if you have a Thief's Ring. Having said that, you can still absolutely get melted really quickly on this fight. What you basically want to do is you want to run to this sword off in the distance, because this sword is the Storm Ruler. And the Storm Ruler basically allows us to use Wind Style. Now, upon getting the Storm Ruler, you want to run back to this house, because the house will provide decent cover from all the projectiles raining down upon you, and you're free to use Wind Style to take out all these flying stingrays. Once you take out enough of these guys, then the Storm King will appear. As far as what we know about the Storm King, well, once again, we know the Storing of Shrines was used for rituals. The final phase of the ritual is to offer for consumption of the purified remains of the Hero of Storms to the Storm King and his Storm Beast in the valley beyond the Shadow Man's shrine. The valley is dotted with dozens of stone monoliths and is believed to be where the spirits of all the Shadow Man's ancestors dwell. It is here where the Storm Ruler, a large thorny spiral sword that has the power to split the sky with thunder, causing damage to any storm beast in its path, was created. Considering the amount of reverence the Shadow Men had for the Storm Beasts and their god, the Storm King, it is puzzling who among them would create such a weapon to have dominions over the storms. Perhaps it was this hubris which angered the Storm Beast and caused the slaughtering downfall of the Shadow Man's civilization. That might also explain why the structure on the right side of the valley, which likely held an altar, was completely demolished. One aspect of the Storm King that is not clearly stated is if it physically existed at the time of the Shadow Man, or if it was a mythological creature that they believed once existed. Accounts from their time describe the Storm King as being a storm beast whose wings covered the sky. However, it is also mentioned that the Storm King is the embodiment of the thoughts of the Shadow Man from hundreds of years ago. That would seem to imply that the Storm King is a myth. It was the god they imagined had dominion over the storm beast, and it would be the deep fog that actually gave form to this belief in the shape of an archdemon. And unlike the storm beasts, which only have two eyes, the Storm King only has one giant eye, which might lend credence to the theory that it was a creation of the fog, as surely the Storm King's offspring would each have one eye if they were actually the Storm King's offspring. Now, once the player has killed enough of its minions, the Storm King will swoop down and fire dozens of marrow spears at the player. It is unclear whether the marrow is coated in some kind of purple liquid, perhaps venom, or if it's the creature's blood and it is firing through barbs in its skin. Now, once you have dealt the finishing blow to the Storm King,
you're free to claim the Storm Demon Soul. Now, the Storm Demon Soul can be used to ascend a short sword, +8 short sword to be exact, into the Marion Blade. Or it can also be used to purchase Anti-Magic Field from Saint Urbain. Regardless of what you decide to do with the Demon Soul, at this point it's time to head back to the Nexus, and we level up with the Maiden in Black before heading to the top of the Nexus to Suicide. That way we can proceed in soul form. Okay, so now we're gonna jump over to the Valley of Defilement. And to be honest with you guys, the way I have structured this is not the most optimal way to go about playing, but this is New Game Plus. So I'm assuming you completed all the world events during your first playthrough. And as such, when you do New Game Plus, you're free to tackle the game in whatever order you want to. Now, the Valley of Defilement is one of people's most hated zones in Demon Souls. But in the remake, they added the Sodden Ring. Now, what the Sodden Ring does is the Sodden Ring allows you to move normally through swampy and murky areas. Originally, during certain sections of the Valley of Defilement, you would be moving extremely slow through the swamp while taking a fuck ton of poison damage. But now, with the addition of the Sodden Ring, it kind of negates that just a little bit. Now, if you look around this place, you can obviously tell this place inspired Blighttown. And the Valley of Defilement is a prime example of an area that's harder than its boss. There's also a vendor down here who speaks with disdain and disgust for Maiden Astrea, but I think her anger is misdirected, because if only she knew what Maiden Astrea's true intentions were. Regardless, once we reach the first boss, you will face the Leechmonger. Now, the Leechmonger is kind of a pushover. In fact, the hardest part of this fight is simply getting down to him, as when you enter the arena is kind of a circular structure with a pathway running along it, and you kind of have to run along that pathway in order to descend down to an area where you can fight him normally. And the whole time you're running along the pathway trying to descend, he's going to be throwing leeches at you, and you're going to be taking minor bleed damage during the whole process. Now, as far as what we know about the Leechmonger is described as being a mass of leeches which chain together in order to form a large creature. And the pit which drains into the poison swamp is the Leechmonger, a large amorphous mass of leeches able to feed on the blood within its leeches in order to regenerate. Now, some believe the Leechmonger is naturally occurring creature, while others believe the deep fog having influence over the leeches drew them together in order to fuse them and form this large cohesive mass like a prisoner horde. Another theory is that the Leechmonger is the corrupted soul of Regalia of Istarel. Regalia of Istarel was one of the holy knights that left with Maiden Astrea in search of the Valley of Defilement. High above, overlooking the Leechmonger's pit, is the resting place of Regalia's wooden spear, Istarel, whose name means Instrument of Istarel and is a holy revelation of God. Regalia made a last stand above the pit of leeches, but was ultimately defeated by a trio of depraved ones, and her corpse fell into the pit below. The leeches fed on Regalia's blood and soul and formed into a demon comprised of a multitude of leeches. Further evidence of this is the spell you receive from the Leechmonger's soul either lets the player harness the power of poison or protects the user from poison, plague, and other diseases. Similarly, the unique aspect of Istarel is that it protects the user, formerly Regalia, from poison and plague. The Leechmonger's ability to regenerate also mimics the effect of a miracle of regeneration, a miracle a high-ranked Holy Knight of the Church would likely be able to perform. After defeating the Leechmonger, you're free to claim the wriggling demon soul. Regardless of what you decide to do with the soul, it's time to head back to the Nexus. We head back to the Nexus and we seek an audience with a Maiden in Black in order to level up. After leveling up, we head to the top of the Nexus and we suicide. That way we can proceed in soul form. At this point, we head back to the Valley of Defilement and we proceed through the Swamp of Poison. Now the Swamp of Poison is kinda rough because you basically need the Sodden Ring or else you're gonna be moving extremely slow through the swamp while taking poison damage. So the Sodden Ring is going to be one of your 2 ring options, which basically leaves you with 1 slot left. So what you can do is you can put on a poison resistance ring and that will help negate some of that poison buildup, but you will ultimately still get poisoned anyway. Or you can just keep on your cling ring for that extra little bit of health, and you can just accept the fact that you're going to be taking constant poison damage and use flowers as well as healing items to try to negate that. I'm going to stick with my cling ring. As you're making your way through the swamp, you will encounter Sellen Vinland. Now she's here on her own little pilgrimage in order to find her relative Garl Vinland. But unfortunately, Garl probably won't make it. And once you kill Garl and you loot his corpse, you can return his insignia to her and she'll give you a nice little reward for that. Also, if you come back on Black World Tendency, she will have a Black Phantom that you can fight. And her Black Phantom is pretty tough. She has a weapon that can bypass your shield and she has miracles that she can use. So yeah, you can look forward to that. Anyway, now once you finish making your way through this area, you'll eventually come to your next boss. And here you'll face the Dirty Colossus. Now the Dirty Colossus is actually a pretty cool boss, but unfortunately, the Dirty Colossus is also kind of a pushover. And if you have any sort of fire damage on your weapon, you can pretty much melt this dude pretty easily. And if you have Firestorm, you can make extremely quick work of this guy. Now, as far as what we know about the Dirty Colossus, the Dirty Colossus is described as being a filth-encrusted large creature which has armor of shells and wood and commands a huge army of flies. In a filth-encrusted valley, the last stop before Maiden Astrea's sanctuary, lives the Dirty Colossus, a hulking asymmetrical creature covered in muck, shells, and infested with flies. What appears to be the creature's head is sticking sideways out of its left shoulder, and it has a mouth and 1 eye. As a Colossus moves, its head flops around as if it were dead. Its body is thick and covered in shells and bits of wood that serve as armor. Its legs have no feet and they end in stumps. On its right arm, where its head would be, is a giant growth or a tumor which the Dirty Colossus uses to bash the player. On its left arm, it also lacks a hand and it ends in a gaping hole from which it fires a swarm of flies at the player. As for origins of the Dirty Colossus, some believe that, like the Leechmonger, it is a naturally occurring demon formed from muck and flies due to the influence of the deep fog. Others speculate that it is chief of the outcasts or a giant depraved one which was corrupted and deformed, attracting flies and turned into a demon to guard the entrance of Maiden Astrea's sanctuary. There was also a moonlight knight that met his end in the Valley of Defilement named Vito. Some theorize that the dirty Colossus is formed from the flies which devoured the knight's corpse. Another theory is that it is a golem, a living being created from the inanimate matter of the valley. The creature is the personification of the disease and decay which eats away at the valley, given shape from the pain and suffering and uncleanliness which Maiden Astrea absorbed from the depraved ones. In that way, the dirty Colossus is both a monument of horrors and of disease and a display of power. The fact that the creature is extremely weak to fire may also be symbolic, as infections are also cleansed with flame and intense heat. The spell crafted from the demon soul is Acid Cloud, which eats away at the condition of an enemy's armor and is a demonstration of the devastating effects of disease. Upon defeating the dirty Colossus, you're free to claim the eroded demon soul, and regardless of what you decide to do with the soul, it's time to head back to the Nexus. So we go back to the Nexus and we seek an audience with the Maiden in Black in order to level up. Then we make our way to the higher reaches of the Nexus in order to suicide. That way we can proceed in soul form. Now, as you make your way back to the Valley of Defilement, the only demon left to fight is the archdemon of this region, which is unfortunately Maiden Astrea. Now, look, this is such a sad fight. In fact, if the game had given me the option to side with Maiden Astrea, I probably would have, or at least for one playthrough. Now, if you've made it this far in the game without questioning whether you were the bad guy or not, this would probably be that point, as when you enter Maiden Astrea's chambers, there's no hostility towards you. They simply ask you to leave this place because they don't want to fight you, and all their actions are defensive in nature. You're the one coming into her chambers attempting to steal her demon soul. In fact, the followers in her chamber don't even attack you, even as you're pelting her with arrows from a distance, or as you're fighting Sellen Vinland. Now, as far as what we know about Maiden Astrea, Maiden Astrea is described as being a young woman in white blood-stained robes. She is able to perform miracles of God, including God's wrath, and she is one of the most intriguing characters in Demon Souls. Maiden Astrea is formerly the sixth saint of the church. When Astrea was a young girl, she found the Ring of Sincere Prayers, one of the few revelations of God, a holy relic which greatly increased the power of miracles. This was likely taken as a sign that Astrea was chosen by God and sent down to the path to become the sixth saint of the church. Like the Vinland family, she hails from the Western Highlands. Though her lineage is unknown, the blue blood sword speaks of true nobility and is created from her pure blood demon soul, which means she may be the daughter of royalty. As the father of Sellen and Vinland was an important cleric to the church, Astrea and Garl likely spent their childhood and teenage years in close proximity. When Astrea became a saint, she took on a knight, Vinland, to serve as her bodyguard, and he accompanied her on her travels. When Astrea heard of the Valley of Defilement, the resting place of those who had been thrown away, she began a pilgrimage to search for it. When Astrea and her knights finally found the valley, her heart was broken, for it was a land seemingly abandoned by God and full of abject suffering. Astrea and Vinland settled in the depths of the valley, and it became a place of sanctuary in which she can comfort those awaiting death. When the deep fog came, her heart became heavy with sorrow, for her God had become cruel, inflicting even more hardships upon the valley's residents. It was then
she decided to forego the cruel god who had abandoned the valley, and she embraced the deep fog, becoming an archdemon as a result. It was Astrea's belief that through this unholy pact, she could do good works and could use her power to take away the suffering of all the outcasts in the valley. For this act of selflessness and compassion, the depraved ones worshipped her as a Christ-like savior, and things were good for a time. When rumors spread that the saint of the church had become a demon, priests and temple knights of all ranks journeyed in search of the Valley of Defilement in order to disprove the rumors. Those warriors from the church, along with any other strangers that entered the valley, were murdered, and their souls were given to Astrea as an offering. She used those souls to maintain her sanity as well as Knight Garl's sanity, and she also used those souls to give life to all the aborted babies that seem to be littering the Valley of Defilement. Astrea has taken in all that is impure, thus she is technically the most impure of all demons, but her divine actions seem to run contrary to that distinction. Through Astrea's demon powers, she gave relief to those who desperately needed it, and she gave life to those who had none. But unfortunately, this was at the cost of many temple knights and priests, while other clerics immediately cursed and damned Astrea's name upon confirmation that she had become a demon. Sellen Vinland was the only person to acknowledge that the demon could possibly do good works. She noticed that despite the grim and filth of the valley, it seemed strangely pure. That purity is the result of Astrea's soul power and influence. While Astrea is hailed as a savior, there are others that speculate that Maiden Astrea is more sinister and not really a victim at all. It is possible that the temple knights and priests and other holy warriors which died in the valley did not come later, but were originally the ones that accompanied Astrea on her pilgrimage down to the Valley of Defilement. But if this is true, then that would raise the question, who struck first? Did Astrea betray them, commanding the depraved ones to attack them? Or did they object to her renouncing God and attempt to kill her first? The filthy woman also accuses her of being a nasty, corrupt influence who is setting herself up as an idol to be worshipped by the outcast and cause all sorts of problems in the valley. Of the three human leaders that Sage Freak states have become demons, Astrea is the only one to truly succeed, as when you look at King Allant, Allant's body was mutated and physically weak. The demon on the throne was merely a fabrication, a doppelganger. The old monk was not the true demon either. He was merely a frail old man who was manipulated into becoming the medium for the true source of power, which was the golden garb. While when you look at Maiden Astrea gained power, maintained her original form in most of her sanity and personality, and when the player encounters Astrea and Garl in the Plague Swamp, unlike other major demons, she attempts to reason with the player and convince them to turn back. She orders Garl not to hunt down and murder the player, but to purely take a defensive stance, only attacking the player if they attempt to pass and hurt Astrea. If the player maneuvers around Garl and starts attacking Astrea, she prays to God, begging him to call the player off, questioning why he continues to torture them. If the player kills Sellen Vinland, she scolds the player for the player's lust for power, then she commits suicide rather than live without Sellen Vinland. The spell which Yurt crafts from a demon soul is based on raw power and emotion. So it is appropriate that Astrea's soul creates a spell of relief which heals allies. The description of the spell best summarizes Maiden Astrea.
Though Astrea is the most impure demon of all, her works are equal to those of divine beings. Conversely, the spell Sage free crafts from the pure blood demon soul is Death Cloud, which taps into the ugliness Astrea took in order to relieve the suffering of the Valley of Defilement's residents. Maiden Astrea's demon soul can also be used to craft the Blue Blood Sword, which is a weapon endowed with the essential power humans are born with, which is luck. So the four aspects of her soul are protection from impure, using evil to do good, the corrupting power of impurity, and the disbelief in God that life is only influenced by luck or chance. Astrea translates to Star Maiden, and in Greek mythology was a goddess associated with innocence, purity, and justice. Eventually, the goddess Astrea was sickened by human greed and ascended to the heavens to become part of the constellation Virgo. Now, up until this point, we've just been running through the game, blindly killing any demon that impedes our progress, simply because the Monumental asked us to. But this is really the point where you should be asking yourself, am I the villain? Regardless, now that the deed is done and you have claimed Maiden Astrea's demon soul, it's time to head back to the Nexus. After we level up with the Maiden in Black, at this point, there's only two bosses really left in the game that we need to kill, and that's the Penetrator and King Allant. But before we do that, we're gonna go ahead and do some world tendency events. And like I said, the way I have structured this is not the most optimal way to go about doing all of the events. Normally, the events are accessible to you immediately after getting pure white world tendency, so you could have done the events very early on. But like I said, this is New Game Plus, and if you had did all the events the first time around and got all the necessary loot, in New Game Plus, you can pretty much do what you want. So that's why we have structured this in this way. Regardless, we're gonna go ahead and do some world tendency events, and we're gonna start in Boletaria. Now we're gonna go ahead and rescue Yuria in Boletaria. This is usually something you would do much earlier on, but assuming you have any spell that you need from her, you probably can do this at your own leisure. Now the first thing we want to do is track down this last fat official. That way upon killing him, we will have a full set of officials gear. Now we can make our way back to the earlier part of the levels and we can free this guy. This guy is actually pretty cool. This guy will actually help you fight the Penetrator. And we can make our way over to this section and we can go ahead and rescue Yuria. Now, in order to rescue Yuria, first thing you're gonna need to do is put on a full set of the fat officials gear. And you'll notice when you're wearing a full set of officials gear, your character will do a maniacal little laugh just like the officials. Now the area where Yuria is at, this platform will only drop assuming you're on White World Tendency and you're wearing a full set of the officials gear or something along those lines. Anyway, upon rescuing Yuria, she will become available to you at the Nexus. So moving on, at the beginning of Boletaria, there is a gate that will only open on pure white world tendency. Now, if you go through this gate, it will lead you to the Executioner grounds and you'll encounter a bunch of weak black phantoms, but you'll also encounter Executioner Meralda. Now, who is Executioner Meralda? Well, Meralda is King Allant's executioner, and she wears a hood, the Binded Cross armor set, and she wields a guillotine axe, and she can be found by entering the execution grounds. And one thing that's worth noting is when you encounter her, she will be immediately hostile towards you and she'll try to kill you. And if you do kill the normal version of her, it will affect your character tendency.
but there's also a black phantom version of her. So if you come back here on pure black world tendency, we can easily fight the black phantom version, and by killing the black phantom version, that will get you one step closer to pure white character tendency. One thing that's worth noting is if you ever cheese one of these guys off the edge, all you have to do is save and reload the game, and the loot the enemy normally drops will be right there where they normally spawn. Also, since we're on pure black world tendency, there is a prime evil demon. Since we killed the black phantom, if we also make our way across the map without teleporting and we kill the prime evil demon, that will boost our world tendency from pure black almost back up to pure white. So keep that in mind. And it will give you a colorless demon soul, and the colorless demon soul is not a guaranteed drop, but assuming you have a providential ring on, it's a pretty good chance you'll get one. Now in World 2, in the area where we fought the Archdemon, I believe if you come back here on pure white world tendency, which you could have done immediately after defeating the Archdemon, you could obtain the Dragon Bone Smasher. Now the Dragon Bone Smasher is one of the best weapons in the game, and if you bring it back to that guy in the area where we're dropping down to the boss, this guy will actually give you the Beast Talisman if you show him the sword. Now there's also a Black Phantom version of this guy, and the Black Phantom version of this guy is freaking tough. So what we're going to want to do is suicide and come back here on pure black world tendency. Upon returning here on pure black world tendency, you'll encounter his Black Phantom, and his Black Phantom will be immediately hostile to you. And his Black Phantom is no bitch. His Black Phantom can use a couple different fire sorceries. He can heal, and he's just all around an overall beast. Like, this dude is an absolute monster. Like, you can kill him, but you probably really need to be using a heavy weapon that deals a lot of damage. If you're using like a standard dex weapon, he'll probably just heal through that eventually. So like, your best bet with fighting this guy is just to push his ass off the edge. But it's all on you at the end of the day. Next, if we jump back over here at the prison of Latria, in the second section where we killed those dudes hoisting up the chains to the heart, in one of those sections, if you go up the stairway on pure white world tendency, there'll actually be a little bridge. If you cross that little bridge, you'll be able to obtain a key. Now this key, I believe it unlocks the cell for Rydell. Now, you can head back and you can rescue Rydell, and you can also rescue Sage Freak, but I'm assuming you probably did that a long time ago. But upon rescuing Rydell, you'll be able to fight his Black Phantom if you come back on pure Black World tendency. So Black Phantom Rydell is another enemy that's kind of a beast. This guy can do some pretty hefty damage, and he can also deal magic damage. Not all of his attack is physical damage, some of it is magic damage, so some of it will automatically just bypass your shield unless you have a shield that blocks 100% magic, which you probably fucking don't. But if you kill this guy, you can obtain, I believe that's the phosphorescent staff or something, but it will also help you obtain pure white character tendency. So now that we have defeated Black Phantom Rydell, one thing that's worth noting is, since we're on pure black world tendency, there is a prime evil demon. And if we manage to make our way to that prime evil demon, that will boost us back almost up to pure white world tendency. But the enemies in Latria are especially dangerous because there are several mind flayers as well as Black Phantom Mind Flayers. And the Black Phantom Mind Flayers are a bitch. They're easily some of the toughest enemies on the map. And if you run into those guys, it's gonna be a really bad time. But if you manage to get past them and make your way all the way to the Prime Evil Demon, you can claim that nice colorless demon soul. Now, if we jump over to the Shrine of Storms, where our farming location is for the soul farm, remember the area where Patches kicked us down? Well, if you return there on White World Tendency, you likely picked up the Magic Makoto sword. Now, if you warp back to the beginning of this level, you'll see there's a guy that's now standing here. If you talk to this guy, he'll ask for the Magic Makoto sword. Now, whether you give him the sword or whether you refuse to give him the sword, I think the guy still ends up being hostile towards you and he'll try to kill you. And one thing that's worth noting, I believe if you do kill him, it does affect your character tendency, but there's also a Black Phantom version of this guy. So if we go ahead and suicide 7 times and we return to this area, we'll be able to fight the Black Phantom version of him. And the Black Phantom version is not that tough. He's kind of a pushover compared to a lot of the other Black Phantoms, but he can still put you down real quick if you're not careful. Regardless, upon killing this Black Phantom, you will obtain Hiltless, which is another great sword that a lot of people say is better than the Uchigata. But killing this Black Phantom will help you achieve pure white character tendency, so keep that in mind. Anyway, we're going to move on. Now, if we jump back over to the Valley of Defilement, I'm not even sure if this necessarily is a tendency event, because you might have just been able to obtain this at any time. But if we follow this area where all these slugs are, eventually we'll come to this path, and up this path will be a bunch of slugs gathered around something in a giant ball. Now, if you hit these guys a few times, eventually they will fall and they will reveal the Moonlight Greatsword. Now, if you kill these guys, you can go ahead and claim the Moonlight Greatsword for yourself. One thing that's worth noting is, unlike in other Souls games, in this game, the Moonlight Greatsword is a faith weapon, just like Istarel. So if you plan on using the Moonlight Greatsword, I believe you need at least 24 faith at base to use the weapon effectively. But the Moonlight Greatsword in Demon Souls looks absolutely spectacular. Anyway, we're gonna move on and we're gonna head over to Sellen Vinland. And remember, if you give Sellen Vinland that crest that Garl was holding, she will be extremely happy for that. Now, Sellen also has a Black Phantom we can fight. So if we go ahead and suicide 7 times, we can return here on Black World Tendency and we can face off against her Black Phantom. And her Black Phantom is actually pretty tough. She has a sword that will completely just bypass your shield. So there's no point in blocking to begin with. She also has several spells like anti-magic field, so she can just totally disable your magic while using magic of her own. She also can perform miracles that will allow her to heal herself. So yeah, she can be kind of difficult to deal with, but if you manage to inflict her with any kind of status, all you have to really do is stay on her before she can heal, and eventually you'll get her down. And once you defeat Sellen's Black Phantom, you can claim the Blinded Sword, and also this will help you achieve pure white character tendency. So keep that in mind. Now, there may be more world tendency events, Those are just the ones I focused on and the ones I feel will help you achieve that pure white character tendency. But the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna jump back over to Boletaria and we're gonna go ahead and help out Ostrava. So Ostrava is actually the Prince of Boletaria, and his real name is Ariona Allant. He's one of the earliest NPCs you can encounter in Boletaria, and when you do encounter him, I believe he's actually wearing the fluted armor set. Upon encountering Ostrava, you can see that he's kind of cornered by a bunch of dredgelings, and he'll ask you to kill them. And you can go ahead and kill these guys, or you can kill Ostrava, but I recommend helping Ostrava out because Ostrava's actually a pretty good dude. So if you choose to help Ostrava, he'll award you with a brass telescope, which was a lot more useful back in the day. Now, after you defeat the Phalanx, you'll encounter Ostrava again, and he'll ask for your assistance once more. He's stuck between a rock and the hard place as he's in a tunnel surrounded by a bunch of enemies. Now you can fight your way down through the enemies from the opposite side, and upon getting to Ostrava, he will be very grateful and he will award you with some dark moon grass. Now the next time you encounter Ostrava will be in the later part of Boletaria as he's being attacked by a red-eye knight. Upon killing the red-eye knight, he'll be very grateful, and I believe he'll give you a clear stone. I could be mistaken about that, but he's happy he can finally proceed on his quest and find his father, which is King Allant. The final time you encounter Ostrava is in World 1-4 at the end of Boletaria, right after the Blue Dragon. He is seemingly emotionally and physically exhausted from the plight he just went through, as it would appear that he has found his father, and all the rumors that he has heard about his father seem to be true. He'll tell the player to seek out old King Doran, and he'll give the player a mausoleum key, and after that he'll either die from his wounds or he'll just commit suicide. It's hard to say, but once Ostrava is dead, he'll reappear as a black phantom right before the elevator to the king's chambers. But before you take on the final boss, it is advised that you go ahead and use the mausoleum key, and you get the option to fight old King Doran. And once you get him down to about half health, he'll tell you to pull the sword out of the stone. And once you pull the sword out of the stone, I believe you can either choose to keep fighting this guy or you can just leave altogether. Now, this sword is very special because I believe this one in particular, if you have pure white character tendency, you'll get a 30% damage boost. This sword also has a twin brother that is wielded by King Allant, and if you have King Allant's sword and you have pure black character tendency, I believe you'll get a 30% damage boost from that sword. But you can also take both of these swords to Blacksmith Ed, and he will combine them for you in order to create the Northern Regalia. That way, regardless of whether you have pure black character tendency or pure white character tendency, you'll receive a 30% buff. Now we're gonna go ahead and jump over to the Penetrator fight. And remember, if you rescue this guy ahead of time, he'll actually help us out during the fight. As far as what we know about this guy, well, this guy's name is Bjor, aka Elder Twinfang. Now, Bjor, the Elder of Two, and Valorfax were both brothers, and they were known as the Royal Twinfangs. They were also both members of King Allant's Knights of the Round Table when the Demon Scourge came to the Boletarian Palace. Now, unfortunately for Bjor, by the time we encountered him, he's actually locked up in the dungeons of Boletaria, as Bjor was unfortunately defeated by black souls of other Knights of the Round Table. In the beginning, Bjor was adamant that the colorless fog could not be the work of the king, and it must be the work of the true perpetrators that seek to overthrow King Allant. But after he assists us in battle, Bjor seemingly comes to terms with the truth, and he warns us not to underestimate the king nor his protectors as the players seek to challenge King Allant. Now, as far as the Penetrator goes, the Penetrator, aka Matas, is described as being an 8-foot tall agile knight wearing a fusion between European style and Asian style armor. He wields a sword that is thin and long and is actually longer than most lances. The Penetrator is the corrupted form of Matas. Matas was a former knight of the Round Table in Boletaria. Before the Scourge, Matas wielded a straight sword which was longer than most spears, and he could kill a man in a single thrust. He now wields a demon soul powered penetrating sword, which is used to cut down foes and has been used to cut down many a warrior who attempted to slay the demon. The Penetrator seems to have a hatred for the fat ministers, as he kills one as soon as you enter the boss arena, and he appears to have a hatred for Bjor, as if Bjor is assisting you during the fight, he mostly attacks Bjor, ignoring the player. The Penetrator's Silver Demon Soul can be used to craft 2 different weapon buffing spells. Light Weapon draws on the power that's inherently in the sword, and Curse Weapon draws on the power from Violet Axe committed with the sword. Matas appears later on in the level as a Black Phantom wearing a mixture of the fluted chest armor and plate armor, and he's wielding his signature penetrating sword. Now, after you cut down the Penetrator, the only boss left is King Allant. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and jump back over to the Nexus and spin this Silver Demon Soul. And regardless on whatever you decide to do with the soul, make sure you level up with the Maiden in Black, then commit suicide. That way you can proceed in soul form. So at this point, we jump back over to Boletaria to face down King Allant. And I know some people struggle with King Allant, like especially on New Game Plus, but you know what? King Allant is kind of a pushover. Like, this dude ain't no Flamelurker. King Allant is no Flamelurker, especially no New Game Plus Flamelurker. King Allant can be easily defeated, especially if this is New Game Plus. You should have at least one overpowered skill by now. And depending on how you go about this fight, you can melt King Allant pretty quickly. But as far as what we know about King Allant, this is King Allant, aka the false King Allant. He is described as being a red-eyed demon that is created in the image of the real King Allant. He wears a white tunic and wields the soul form version of the black sword Soulbrand. He can also cast the spell Soul Sucker, which steals the souls from the player, and I believe it can actually de-level you too. Now, King Allant was once a magnanimous ruler who cared greatly for all of his subjects and who fought diligently against the vile and depraved. Unfortunately, he became trapped in melancholy in his old age, and he searched tirelessly for a method to expand his might. King Allant's search ended in the Nexus, where the power of the soul arts were bestowed upon him. It is unclear who his teacher was, likely the Maiden in Black, or one of the Monumentals who perished a while ago, but Allant's ability Soul Sucker makes the Maiden in Black more or less the likely suspect. King Allant returned to the northern kingdoms of Boletaria with his knowledge of the soul arts, and it brought unprecedented prosperity. It was at that point King Allant took the black sword, the soul brand, a baneful weapon which grows more powerful the more demonic the soul who wields it becomes, from the royal mausoleum, and from that day, the soul brand has never left its side. Elementary knowledge of the soul arts was not enough to quench his thirst and his lust for power, so Allant eventually returned to the Nexus and awoke the long-forgotten evil, the Old One, from its eternal slumber. As a servant to the Old One, King Allant was granted unfathomable power, which slowly mutated his corporal form, eventually transforming his body into a pathetic toad-like creature. But using his newfound power, he fashioned a new demon doppelganger to lead the demon scourge and reap more souls to quench the bottomless thirst of the Old One. Slowly, the colorless deep fog began to spread throughout the land, and wherever it touched, man began to lose their souls and their sanities. King Allant believes the Old One is a gift of mercy from God. So much pain, evil, and misery fills the world, and the solution is to fight poison with poison. Once the colorless demon fog has engulfed the entire land and has absorbed every last human soul in existence, it will finally end our suffering once and for all. One interesting aspect the developers added to the False King Demon Doppelganger is the twin trails of energy that seems to rise from behind both shoulders. The trails almost have the appearance of an ethereal angel's wing, and it could mean something as if the demon is some manner of fallen angel molded in the image of the king. Or it could just be a coincidence that the energy happens to flow in an upward manner. The False King's demon soul is used to fuse together soul brand as well as demon brand into the fabled sword, the Northern Regalia. The fabled Northern Regalia is considered the original emblem of royalty of the Northern Kingdoms. The weapon is most potent when its user is at either their most depraved, which would be pure black character tendency, or their most pure, which would be pure white character tendency. The Northern Regalia is as ancient as the Old One, and like the Old One, it was left in the world for malicious purposes. Now, once you return to the Nexus, one thing you'll notice is that you can no longer level up, as since you are at the end of the game, once you talk to the Maiden in Black, she will tell you that the Old One calls for you, and she will take you below the Nexus to have an audience with the Old One. It is at that point you'll get to meet the Old One as well as confront the real King Allant. So as you descend down to the bottom of the Nexus, you meet the Old One. And I found it really intriguing that there appears to be birds down here as well as the Old One. And one thing that becomes immediately apparent is how immense this thing is, as this thing is so huge and it appears to have been impelled with several weapons that I guess warriors of the past attempted to use to slay the demon with, to no avail, obviously, as the Old One is still here. Now, the Old One is described as being the supreme of all demons. Below the Nexus, the day after man was given a soul, with it, he was given clarity, and upon the earth fell an incurable poison, a soul-devouring demon. The corporal form of that demon is likely the Old One, as the Old One is massive, several miles high in fact, and he's described as being a tree creature surrounded by white light. Long ago, the Old One was awakened and a deep fog swept across the land, devouring the souls of humanity and causing insanity and death. half of the world was destroyed before the Old One was put back to sleep and imprisoned below the Nexus. The Old One is a bottomless pit of nothingness with an insatiable appetite for souls, but it cannot collect souls itself. It needs a demon servant it either conjures from myth or dead creatures, or a human that has been transformed into a demon to collect souls that have been sapped by the fog. Now, the primary religion in Boletaria believes in one single god. They believe that spells are the work of the devil and that magicians are his servants, and they believe that miracles are clearly good and they're the work of God. In reality, miracles return to Boletaria at the same time as the soul arts, but the church clearly believes one is good and one is bad. The truth is, miracles and spells are both soul arts and they're both feats from the Old One. This is also proved by the Talisman of Beasts, which is a wood carving in the image of the Old One, and it allows you to use both spells and miracles. So in reality, the primary religion in the game that believes they're worshiping God is actually worshiping the Old One. Now, one interesting theory states that the tree at the end of the game was once a pure being, and it was the source of all soul arts, kind of like the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. It also states that originally the soul arts could only be channeled through one's own soul in order to do limited magic, but under the influence of the soul-devouring demon, humans attempted to torch the tree and steal its power in order to greatly harness it. Another theory states that the soul-devouring demon is not actually a physical being, but it is more like a metaphor for the greed and depraved impulses of humanity, in which case it is humanity's darkness and thirst for power, not some unholy creature which polluted the tree and created the Old One. So as you climb inside of the Old One, you get to confront the true King Allant. And one thing that becomes immediately apparent upon confronting the true King Allant is that he has been transformed into this slug-like, frog-like creature, and he tries to fight us, but his physical body form is so pathetic that he really can't put up any sort of fight whatsoever. This is the result of endlessly sucking down souls. After you defeat King Allant, you get to claim the Soul Brand. Now, what you actually want to do at this point is you actually want to use evacuate to evacuate out of here. That way you can return to the Nexus, because if you proceed, you won't be able to go back to the Nexus immediately. And what you actually want to do is, now that you have Soul Brand, you want to make your way over to World 2 and you want to go talk to Ed. That way he can fuse the swords together to create the Northern Regalia. Because if you don't do this, you'll basically have to do all of Boletaria in New Game Plus before you can fuse these weapons together. Now, unlike other Souls games that have 8 different endings, 6 of which can only be accessed by doing a bunch of specific crazy ass shit, the endings in Demon Souls are pretty cut and dry. You have your good ending and you have your bad ending. In your bad ending, what you do is you attack the Maiden in Black, and basically at that point you retain the soul arts and you become the new host of the Old One, just like King Allant was. In the good ending, you basically just allow the Maiden in Black to lull the Old One back to sleep, and you leave the area, and by doing so, the world will lose their knowledge of the soul arts, and the Maiden in Black and the Old One will be dragged back into the abyss, but you'll be free from your Nexial bindings,
and you will become the new Monumental. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Demon Souls.
The Old One, along with the Maiden, were swept back into the lulling fog. Boletaria was spared from the demons, but also lost its knowledge of the soul arts. The souls lost during the pandemonium were never retrieved. And today, the unstable world has another Monumental to hold its fabric together. A brave new hero of unprecedented power.